Shelly, your host of With Bowl and Spoon podcast, a podcast about people's personal food evolution, but it's also about sustainability and food system stuff, and it's about food, I guess, primarily, but also about like living your life and how you become aware of different things and how you evolve. So I know I haven't really been very vocal on the podcast, except to ask questions and to talk to my guests, but I haven't really for the past year been very able to tell personal stories or really talk about myself or what's going on. I haven't really felt free to actually talk about what's been going on with me, and some of you might know, but it's been a really tough past year, starting July 12th of 2023. And a lot has happened in this past year, but it really, it's ended now. It has ended, and it has ended in a kind of positive way. Yeah, it was a crazy year. It was full of ups and downs and trials, and long story short, I got fired from my job at the city. They realized the error of their ways, and I ended up with a cash settlement. So that's good. But the bad news is that I kind of feel like that is the end of that career path, essentially. Yeah, I worked at the city for 9 years, and then this year was the 10th year, so it's like the past decade of my life, and it was really interesting. I feel like I accomplished a lot, and so I wanted to tell you that story and talk about that and sort of wrap that whole thing up. So I've had more of a career hiking trail, I like to say, than a career path. It's kind of like finding your style, like when you first move into your first apartment and you're trying to figure out, what your style is. You're trying to figure out, should I get animal print stuff, or should I get this rug and that couch and that painting to go with it? Like you're maybe trying, and then eventually you realize that just as you buy things that you like, they go together as long as you're like genuinely getting things that you like. And so that becomes your style. You just sort of realize that that's your style, and it emerges from that. So I kind of have done that with my career. I've done things that I like, or things that seem like a good idea at the time, and I've mostly been happy with the work that I've been doing. Sales led me to politics and political fundraising, which didn't last very long, but I learned a lot and met a lot of really great people. Politics is a roller coaster that I do not wish to ride very often. But my work with the city evolved out of my love of growing food. I have been growing stuff all my life, growing food. I remember picking scallions in the garden with my dad, and also digging night crawlers out of our garden, because it was a really good garden, had a lot of night crawlers. And I remember the rhubarb, and I remember a few things. My grandmas both grew tomatoes, and my one grandma canned a lot of tomatoes. Grandma Morley canned tomatoes, and I still can tomatoes exactly the way she did to this day. So we bought a house, and we started growing at our house, and I realized I needed more space to actually grow stuff that I wanted. So looked around, had a shared garden on Stanton Avenue at the cemetery garden, and then got involved with Mildred's daughter's farm. And when I got laid off from my job in 2004, I did a big evaluation of like, what do I spend money on? And I realized that my priorities were on food. I mean, I spent the most of my budget on food, and not just eating out, like buying food to bring home. And so I thought, well, right, let's take out the middleman and just grow food, and I'll work to grow food. So I did a CSA at Mildred's daughter's farm, which was 5 hours a week, which was a lot in farm hours. If you haven't ever worked on a farm or out in the sun where things grow in the middle of the summer, it is a challenge. So I did the CSA at Mildred's Daughters, and then I started working when Grow Pittsburgh actually became an organization which branched out of Mildred's Daughters. I got a job there, and I helped establish the first 2 edible schoolyards in Pittsburgh. And then I ran the summer intern program, and that's a whole other story. We'll save that for another episode. All of this and, other interest, farmers markets. We were really big on going to the farmers markets, and we were so lucky. We had one on Monday at the in East Liberty over on the vacant lot across from the fire station, and we had another one on Thursday down in the zoo parking lot. So we were just really, really fortunate, a little spoiled for choice there. But when Chatham started its food studies program in 2010, I saw the ad for it, and I was like, absolutely, that is what I want to do. There were 30 of us. 30 people started in the program's first semester right out of the gate. And Chatham isn't a really big school. There's like 2,500 students. So that's like a little over 1% of the student body for a new program in its first semester. I thought that was pretty bonkers. Anyway, the program was really hard, and it enlightened me and taught me so much about the world and about myself and about systems and systems thinking and how to research and how to write and just so much. So even though it was a new program and things weren't established yet and didn't really get to take advantage of things like that, there was supposed to be a semester in Italy, and I was like, absolutely, Brett, I'm going for a semester to Italy. And he's like, okay, but that didn't happen. I don't know if they're doing that now, but I hope they are. And then there was supposed to be a trip to Costa Rica, which didn't happen in my time there. But anyway, we had the run of Eden Hall campus up in Gibsonia, which was a really great time. That was fun. We got to stay the night out there and cook in the giant kitchen, and it was a lot of fun. We got to do a lot of things I'm sure the students today can't do, so that was fun. So I graduated in 22 months along with 6 or 7 or 8 of my classmates. It wasn't all of us, but it was a nice chunk of us. I did some work at farmers markets. I drove a meat truck, sampled salsa for a while, had some other odd jobs and consulting gigs, but nothing was really consistent. And then in 2013, Bill Peduto ran for mayor, and I had worked on his campaign in 2005. And then he ran again in 2007. So in 2013, he won. He ran and he won. And it was May. And he wouldn't take office until the following January. But here in Pittsburgh, it's a Democratic city. Democratic strong city. So if the whatever candidate wins in May, even if there's a Republican on the ballot in November, it's 99.999% sure that the Democratic candidate will win. So in May, he was elected mayor, essentially. And I was like, this is amazing. I was really excited to talk to him about food policy. And he had supported me. He wrote me a letter for Chatham, and we had kept in touch, and I was really excited to talk to him about policy, because I didn't really know a lot about policy when I worked with him. I was his finance director, so I was with him a lot. And, we'd be in the car a lot. And I just didn't really feel like we had anything in common. And then I was like, oh my God, I know policy now. I could talk to him about this stuff. I know about food systems, and I know about different things. So that was great. But we didn't really have that opportunity the entire time I worked for the city, which was really interesting. Or the entire time that he and I both worked for the city at the same time. Anyway, I remember when in 2011, when Bill Peduto was councilman, and they were working on the urban ag code around chickens, because I had chickens. I remember he called me to tell me that it passed, and I was not impressed. I was like, it's expensive, it's intimidating. It was like $360, and then you had to go in front of the zoning board. You had to do a site plan. It was just bonkers. And he was like, well, it's a start. And I was like, all right. And I eventually understood what he meant by that. So anyway, when he is elected in May, even though we're still pretending that it's not certain for 6 more months, and then we act surprised in November, I was excited, and I was like, I know, I have some great ideas. Maybe I could help him with the transition. I reached out to him, and he said, great, meet with my chief of staff, Matt Barron. I was like, okay, cool. So Matt and I met in Lawrenceville, and it was the best interview I've ever had. And he said to me, well, it's fortuitous that you wanted to meet with me. Bill wanted me to meet with you too. And I said, oh, yeah, great. And I said, what did you want to talk about? And then he said, Bill wants to have an Office of Urban Agriculture and Food Policy. And I was like, oh my God, that is amazing. That's great. What can I do to help? And he said, he wants you to run it. And I said, that's awesome. okay. And then he said, do you like margaritas? And I said, yes. And he said, do you want to split a pitcher? And I said, sure. And that was it. And then we had margaritas and tacos and enjoyed a lovely evening in Lawrenceville. So fast forward to January. He took office, and I understand that it's going to take a while to fit me in. And you know, I'm waiting. I'm patient. And January goes by, and February goes by, and then March, I'm like, what's happening? And so, you know, I'm sending him messages on occasion. I know he's busy. I don't want to really bother him. And finally, he sends me a message and says, like, can you please stop bothering me? It's going to be a couple more weeks. And I was like, oh, okay. All right, great. So the 2 weeks go by, and I didn't hear back. And so I'm the kind of person that, maybe it's my sales background, but I don't like to ask a question that's asking for action. I like to ask a question and say, if I don't hear back from you, this is what I'm going to assume. More just, I don't know what that's called. But anyway, so on the Friday before the Monday that he told me was the 2 weeks when I was going to start, I sent him an email and said, I'll be at the office, the mayor's office at 8 a.m. on Monday unless I hear back from you. And I didn't hear back. Friday, Saturday, Sunday at 4 o'clock, I got an email from the mayor's chief of staff, his mayoral chief of staff, Kevin Acklin, saying, don't come to the mayor's office, come to city planning, make it 9 a.m. And so that's how I started my job at city planning. When I got there, nobody had told them that I was coming. So I ended up going away and then coming back, and the next week starting. They didn't have a desk for me or anything. Anyway, that was weird. But the position that I was hired for in the Department of City Planning was called Open Space Specialist. And that was a position that was developed out of the Open Space Plan that was from 2013. It was a plan about all the open space in the city. So it was like parks and rights of way and all the vacant land. Now, the city has a ton of vacant land, and I'll talk about that at some other time and the reasons for that. But there's probably 40,000 parcels that the city owns that used to have houses on them, or some of them do have houses on them, but there's 5,268. Oh, I still remember that number. That were in the purview of this part of the plan. So it was mandated that the city figure out how people can access this land for gardens, and then to hire someone to manage that flow of projects. A lot of nonprofits like Grow Pittsburgh and Grounded had been working with community members for a while and utilizing vacant land. Communities would get interested in a lot, and then Grounded would go through the process of getting a lease on that land from the city, and it would take like 12 to 18 months to get a lease. And by that point, nobody's interested in it anymore. They forgot about the project, and the steam is just like gone. So that was really putting people off of doing these projects. And, you know, there's no reason to not let people use the land to do a garden project, because it's there. It beautifies the community. It takes work off the city. It was interesting going into city planning, being placed there by the mayor and not knowing how much everybody knew about what I did. Instead, the open space specialist, I would call myself the urban agriculture and food policy specialist, because people didn't know what open space specialist, I mean, I don't even know, but still, what does that mean? I don't know. And the mayor would never say my name. He would say, oh, I've got my chicken lady over in planning, and it was just really weird. So I figured, right, I gotta figure out how to make this Office of Urban Agriculture and Food Policy. I need to show a need for it. I need to figure out what the city can do around food and figure out how to make that happen. And then the mayor would be like, okay, great, we got the base for an Office of Food Initiatives, let's do it. I looked at what other cities were doing. I looked in other countries, which is kind of depressing because they were doing so much more on community food systems than anybody in the U.S. But there were some really good models in the U.S. I ended up being part of the U.S. Conference of Mayors Food Policy Advisors group, which was a really fun, great group of people. So I looked at the food system. I looked at growing, processing, retail, consumption, and then waste. So within that, I figured we could do something within growing. Obviously, urban agriculture, we got the land, that's land use. Planning is all about land use, so easy peasy. The processing was more the county. the county has to do with the food safety laws and all that, so that we can't do anything. The city has no purview over that. But I did want to do a cottage food law, but it actually did come up as part of what they were working on at the county, and I wanted to be involved, but the Food Policy Council was involved and I wasn't included, and so it was just, yeah, that whole thing is a hot mess. I'll mention that again at some point. Anyway, then retail, the city ran at the time, I think 8 farmers markets during the season. So that was something that we could look at, supporting farmers in that way. Consumption, that's more of the food safety rules through the county, so can't do much about that. And then compost or waste, the compost, that's land use, and we could do something about that. So I had the growing part of that with the land use, the retail with the farmers markets, and the waste with the compost. So I figured those were 3 areas that where everything coincided that we could actually work on. So that's what I ended up focusing on. But the first thing was to fix the urban ag code, and that was something that was an ongoing thing, ongoing meetings with Grow Pittsburgh and the Food Policy Council and a bunch of stakeholders from around the area. It took about 6 months of meetings and editing, and it was pretty intimidating because I never really worked on a zoning code before, and we went back and forth on the goats, and I was doing research about ruminators and all kinds of stuff. Anyway, one day I came in and my supervisor was just like, can we just make it 2 mini goats, no more, no less, for 2,000 square feet? And I was like, okay. And so that's what we made it, and that's what settled it. But one of the things that I did as I was sitting there getting stuff ready to send to council, I was like, wait a minute, can we change the word homeowner to, because it would say a homeowner with a property of 2,000 square feet, blah, blah, blah. So the people, if you're not the owner, you couldn't come in and get a permit. And a lot of people, you'd be surprised how many people actually follow the rules and wouldn't even come in pretending to be the owner if they were just renters. People are very honest. It's kind of crazy. So anyway, I said to my supervisor, is there any reason that I couldn't change the word homeowner to be resident? And he was like, I don't see any reason why not. Yeah, go ahead. So I did a find and replace, and everywhere that it said homeowner, I changed it to resident, and that was how it passed. So I'm really proud of that. So now people who rent can raise livestock and grow food and have their little homestead in the city, including bees, miniature goats, and chickens. You're welcome. It became clear that the Food Policy Council, because they had hired a director the same month that I was hired at the city, which was pretty cool. But it became clear that they were not going to demand things for me to work on. So they were working on their governance structure for the first 2 years, and then they were building their membership, which is fair. I mean, it's great. A lot of these organizations never really connected, never communicated, and they were now more of an organization, more of a network, which was really good. We needed that. But I was looking to do stuff because I was on a mayor term sort of calendar and thinking in terms of, I got 4 years. Can't guarantee any longer than that. So what can we do? Go. But they weren't going to do anything. So we did the urban ag code. And then while we're working on the vacant lot toolkit and the adopt a lot program and the legislation that goes with that, the Food Policy Council wanted me to survey all of the city departments to see what they do and what they do around food. That was probably a year and a half of busy work. We actually met with a methodologist to help with the flow of the survey. I mean, it was just... Anyway, so I was just looking for them to list priorities, and I actually wrote a memo and presented it to them and said, can we just give this to the mayor? And they're like, no, I don't know if that's... It was really difficult, as if they didn't know what things needed to be changed. So, yeah, so the governance structure and building the membership took the first term of the mayor, and still no recommendations. And then the second term was their action plan, which came out in 2020, and there were 600 and some actions total, and I think maybe 52 for the city. And yeah, it was too late because then Mayor Peduto was unelected. So it was over. At the end of 2015, I'd gotten a notice that there was this thing called the Milan Urban Food Policy Pact. And I wanted to get the Food Policy Council to suggest that I don't know. I was really leaning hard on the Food Policy Council, trying to get them to ask for things, because I thought it would provide me with a direction and with a whole organization that was like directing me, but that wasn't going to happen. So when I heard about this Milan Urban Food Policy Pact, which would help with a lot of my work, it's an international agreement to follow best practices for sustainable food systems and food access. And it would really support the work that I wanted to do around urban agriculture and composting specifically. So I sent the mayor an email and told him what it was. I very briefly explained what this was. And like 4 minutes later, he emailed me back and said, sign us up. So I went on their website and tried to figure out how to sign us up and couldn't find any place. And so I just was like, okay, we signed it. It must just be a symbolic thing. I sent an email, didn't hear back. And so we put out a press release and said that we signed it. And 6 months later, Milan got back in touch with us and they're like, oh, hey, we heard that you want to sign this. Do you want to make it official? So they sent us all the official paperwork and we signed on to it in a more official way. But yeah, that was really great. And that was like the first time that the mayor, like I hadn't emailed him, much, if at all, up to that point. So it was really great that he signed it and he was like, yeah, that's great. And like I said, it helped with a lot. The law department was really hesitant to do anything that took any risks unless the mayor explicitly said he wanted it to happen. And so, having this document of all of these things that the mayor signed it, he said he supports all of the things in here. I was able to say, look, the benefit outweighs the risk, and the mayor wants to see this happen, so this is what we should do. And the law department was really good about working with me on that. So then 2016 was just developing the Adopt a Lot program, getting that off the ground. And also I had been looking at, like I said, the compost thing. I thought, well, we got a lot of vacant land. We could do this food waste composting on vacant land in the city. I got it approved as a farming activity with the Adopt a Lot program, which was cool. I wanted to have what I would call soil mills. I thought instead of steel mills, soil mills, we'd have these like dotted around the city where people could take their food waste and drop it off and they could compost there. And so I started meeting with a group of people who were already talking about composting with, other entities, like with the mayor and with, they had tried to have meetings here and there. There were like 30 people. So we had a couple meetings and then met with the DEP and they're like, yeah, we want to see this happen. There's just no permit right now. So we need someone to do a pilot project and then we can help them with the permit. Eventually I met with Kyle Winkler because he was the expert around composting in the city. He had worked for another organization in town and he was the recycling manager. We had lunch one day and he was like, look, if you want to move forward on this, like there's something you should know. And I was like, what's that? And he said, if you're going to have a composting pilot program, first you have to make composting legal in the city. And I was like, wait, what? And he was like, yeah, it's not legal. We have to write municipal code to make it legal. And I was like, well, okay, it's not, it wasn't legal. It wasn't illegal. It was kind of in that gray area. But what would happen is the inspectors would go out if there was a complaint about like debris in someone's yard. A homeowner would say, no, this is compost. And they'd say, well, it looks like debris to me. There's nothing in the code that outlines compost. So recently in the previous couple years, they would call Kyle and they'd be like, hey, what does composting look like? And Kyle would walk them through it. The inspectors would be like, oh yeah, that is composting. Or, oh no, this isn't composting. So that was kind of how he knew that it needed to be updated so that it was more clear and then technically legal in the city. So instead of starting a soil mill pilot project and working with the DEP to create a permit, we wrote municipal code and then waited because it wasn't in our part of the municipal code. It was in Public Works part of the municipal code and they wanted to update a few other things. So that took a couple years. We started that in 2016. I guess we drafted that in the summer of 2016 and it passed in January 2019. So that was really interesting. So I definitely have to talk more about the Adopt a Lot program. It deserves more time, mostly because it took a lot of my time and I definitely need to talk about it, but also I'm very proud of it. The Adopt-A-Lot program was the first time in the history of the city of Pittsburgh that people could access city-owned land for gardens. Prior to that, it was, you could talk to the mayor and he'd give you permission. A couple mayors had programs where they'd do there was the green up and there was the red up, and that's REDD, which is clean up, red up. That's what we say here in Pittsburgh. I'm going to red up my room. Anyway, so the mayor would do a program like that. Maybe a council person would be like, oh yeah, go ahead and use that land. But once that leadership was elected out, then that verbal agreement was just dissolved. So to actually technically, legitimately, legally have access to the land, we needed a program. And that's what the Adopt-A-Lot program was. So from 2014 till the end of 2015, my colleague Josh worked on creating the Vacant Lot Toolkit and the Adopt-A-Lot program, which ended up being legislated. So it's part of the city. It's a program that should stay with the city. And so it couldn't disappear with an administration change. So anyway, it was, like I said, the first time in the history of the city that people could legitimately access city-owned land for projects. It was designed to allow equitable access to city-owned land. For example, the applicant didn't have to acquire a letter of approval from the community group or the council person, because sometimes that's a barrier for folks or organizations. There's personal and community politics around that stuff. So the Adopt-A-Lot program was meant to be more neutral. If the applicant completed the application, as long as the project fit within the guidelines of the Vacant Lot Toolkit and provided all the information we requested, they could get a lease. It was a 1-year lease, and then after a year, they could qualify for a 3-year lease. And I did inspections every year. It was really a labor of love. So for the program to succeed, we needed applicants, we needed successful applicants, and we needed successful projects. So that was really my focus. I made sure that it was accessible to everyone. If someone didn't have the ability to do a site plan, or if someone didn't have a computer, I would go and help them, and I would do those things for them and troubleshoot all parts of their application to make sure that it would qualify. Now, I didn't break any rules. There was way too much at risk, and I knew that. So as long as the project fit within the guidelines and their application was complete, I could actually write them an agreement. So it was all on me, which was really a lot of pressure. And it was the first time that we had a template agreement at the city, as far as I could tell, since everyone seemed to think it was a really big deal. Usually you'd have to send something to the law department, send an agreement to the law department, and then they'd have to write it and make their little tweaks, and then they'd send it back, and then it would go back and forth. And that could take, like I said, the 12 to 18 months that most people would wait to get an agreement. So the way we had it, it could be done in a matter of 9 to 12 weeks. And I got it down to about 6 weeks. If someone was really serious about doing it and had all of their ducks in a row, we could make that happen. As far as the template leases go, I had 9 of them. So there was the license, there was the lease, and then there was the market stand lease. And within each of those, there were the 3 levels of our soil policy. And I should mention that too, with the soil policy. That was one of the first out of the office meetings I went to with my supervisor. And it was to talk to a garden about the high levels of lead that came back. And then we were determined to have a soil policy. And so we worked with Penn State and created a soil policy about lead in the soil. I can't remember when we passed that. It was before the Vacant Lot Toolkit, but that became the basis of people utilizing land throughout the city. So other departments use it too, to this day. It's still there. It's really great. Anyway, the Adopt-A-Lot program is a remarkable program, not just for Pittsburgh, not just for the residents of the city of Pittsburgh to be able to access land, but for other municipalities. This was something that was unheard of, and we had figured out how to lease land to residents. It was pretty remarkable. Municipal-owned land. So I had calls from San Diego, Seattle, New Haven, Connecticut actually copied the Vacant Lot Toolkit and the Adopt-A-Lot program. I went to Altoona to speak, which was really cool. So yeah, sure, it wasn't perfect, but it was good. It was a solid base, and for 8 years, I did a solid job of making sure that the program was beyond reproach. Every project was absolutely legit, and I couldn't let anything slide. I did nobody any favors. I made sure everything was as it should be. Well, now that said, I did slide on a couple things like signage. I thought our signage was so boring. They were brown signs, very small. They were 16 by 16 square. they were really not very inventive. And, community garden signs should be colorful and bright and get people's attention. That's the whole point. But then you couldn't have signage on, it's the whole thing. Government is so wacky. Anyway, I learned a lot, but that was one of the minor things. And I thought, well, if someone calls me on it, then that's fine. I guess at a certain point I didn't care. Anyway, it was my responsibility to make sure that the program succeeded. And even though the Food Policy Council and Grounded and Grow Pittsburgh, all the people that wanted to see this program happen, they were ignoring it for years because they didn't think it was enough. Actually, the Food Policy Council worked with the URA to create this Farm-A-Lot program, which never got off the ground, primarily because once they finished their work with the URA, they were like, okay, great, this is done. They didn't recommend or demand that there was a staff assigned to it or a staff position hired for it. So it never got staffed. And I can tell you, as the sole staff for the Adopt-A-Lot program, that was a lot of work. It was pretty much the only thing I was able to do. And the way that I did other work that I did was through interns. I had a lot of interns. I had 52 amazing people work with me in my tenure at the city, and it was really great. I'm so grateful to them. I wouldn't have gotten most of the other things done besides the Adopt-A-Lot program had it not been for my lovely, amazing interns. But anyway, the fact is that the Adopt-A-Lot program wasn't perfect, but it was a start. And in the last couple years, I was working with the URA on their Farm-A-Lot program because new staff that would come in, they'd find out about Farm-A-Lot and they'd be like, oh yeah, let's do this. And so I would hear from them every once in a while. I helped them design their applications probably like 4 years after they started, 4 years after it was developed or written or whatever. So they needed to have an application. So I helped them work on that. And then a couple of years later, they contacted me about something else and I tried to work with them. So my idea was that the Farm-A-Lot program could sort of be what Adopt-A-Lot participants graduated into. So you could adopt the land from the city for a while, prove your stewardship of the land, and then it could be transferred to the URA. The URA could buy it, and they have the opportunity to quiet the title in a different way. They would be able to do that, and then the applicants could be transferred to the URA, do the Farm-A-Lot, and they could lease to own through the URA, or even just buy it from the URA at some point. I mean, that was kind of the path that we were looking at, and that's what the URA and I were talking about. That didn't happen, but anyway, it was a really great program, and I'm really proud of the work that we did. We had 8.5 acres of community gardens, 13 gardens. There were 9 production farms, and they took up 3.19 acres. Grew all kinds of stuff, and there were 23 flower gardens, over 6 acres of flower gardens throughout the city. And then we had just about a 1/4 acre of rain gardens. There were 2 of them. It was a great program, and I'm very proud of the work that I did with that. So there were a few other things that I was able to accomplish while I was at the city that I'm particularly proud of. One of the things that I was looking at for some information about what I should do, what we should do at the city around food policy was in 2015, SPC, the Southwestern Pennsylvania Commission, did a report on local food systems about the local food supply chain. And one of the things that it mentioned was that there's not a very strong urban-rural connection between farmers and consumers. And so I had heard on NPR that there was this organization in DC that did this farmer and chef speed networking event. And I was like, let's do that here. And so I reached out to SPC, and we got Sustainable Pittsburgh involved. So Rebecca from Sustainable Pittsburgh, and we created this event. And in 2017, we did that for the first time. We did it at Spirit in Lawrenceville. We did it on a Monday, and we invited farmers and food producers, and then chefs and store owners. So there were a few little stores around that like to buy local. And we didn't I called them looky-loos. So it wasn't like anybody who was just like, oh, I want to meet chefs, I want to meet farmers. No. You have to be a chef or a farmer, and you're there for networking purposes only. And so the first one we did, we had like over 100 people there, which was fantastic. And we had them each get up on stage and talk about why they were there, what their product was. And then we had some feedback after that and decided to do it more of the formal, like, sit down. So the next one, I think we had like 80 people show up at the second one, and they sat across from each other, and the farmer or the food producer had the stable position, and the chef or the buyer had to move seats every 2 minutes, I think. So we had to, like, we set a timer, and they got a minute to speak one way and then a minute to speak the other way. And then they had to switch places. And one of the things that I'm really proud of is Goat Rodeo was at our first Farmer Chef speed networking event. And at that event, they made a contact with a buyer. I can't remember who it was, maybe Cisco or something. Anyway, they ended up making a deal and getting distributed broadly and being very successful. And we did ask people to let us know how it went for them. And he wrote me an email saying how effective the networking event was for his business. And I was really proud. That was one of the best letters that I could have gotten. It was awesome. A couple other things. We did the farmers market study. So the farmers market study looked at all of our farmers markets in the region. There were about 25 that served the residents of the city that happened during the season. Looked at a way to connect them and create more of a network so that they could share information, share marketing, and strengthen and expand access to fresh, affordable, quality food. And one of the great things that came out of that was the study was released in early 2019. But when it started, the consultants connected all of the farmers market managers. And so they were networking, they were talking to each other for the first time, I think before they had thought they were in competition with each other. So they had started to communicate, and Penn State started offering courses on different aspects of farmers markets, signage and food safety stuff. And so that was really, they got together and networked and connected and got to know each other over the course of that, year and a half before COVID hit. And then when COVID hit, they were already in communication. And so when everyone was freaking out in April about opening the farmers markets, they were able to look to each other and ask for help on how do you set up a flow of the market with this? How do you do cashless? How do you do hand washing stations? So, all of these questions they were able to answer for each other. They were able to work together to get their markets open. And it was really amazing. It was great to watch. I really wanted to do a project somehow, something regarding food insecurity and what it actually looked like in the city of Pittsburgh. In 2018, I had an intern named Maher Javed who worked with me full time for the summer, and we wanted to come up with a project. So we decided to work on a report for the city to look at food insecurity. So city council had been asking me for a while, like, what is food insecurity? Where is food insecurity? And where's, the hotspots? So needed to sort of outline what food insecurity was, what caused it, and where it was specifically in the city. So we worked on that for 2 years, and it finally came out in 2020. It's still on the city's website, so you can see that. But Maher worked on it first, and then I had a bunch of other interns. So like Chris Sue worked on it, and Madison, and Jay Killian, and Cheyenne was there, worked on some of it. So they're all credited in the document, but it's really a great report. It's been used by a bunch of people in the city, and I'm really proud that we did it. Not that anything has been done by the city to alleviate any of the food insecurity, but at least we know where it is, and we as a city, not as the city government, at least we know where it is. And we did make a list of recommended steps that we could take to build more of an equitable food infrastructure, but that never really got to fruition because that was something that we would have to run by the stakeholders, and that wasn't really a thing that was possible yet. So the report is on the City of Pittsburgh's website. You can see the PDF there, or if it's not there when you're listening to this, if it's for some reason gone, just email me and I'll send it to you because I got it. And that was 2020. Like I mentioned, pandemic happened, and the farmers market study helped with the farmers markets getting up and running again. So that was cool. And then during the pandemic, of course, there was food shortages and people doing food distributions. So there wasn't a lot of coordination around people doing emergency food deliveries and that sort of stuff. So I worked with Chef Claudie Pierre, and we created the Food Access Network Group, or FAN, F-A-N, Food Access Network. And we convened local food advocates to share food distribution and volunteers and resource information across the city. So, and it wasn't just in the city, it was throughout the area. So anybody could join, and we would meet weekly, and we had food distributions, and we'd go out and volunteer, and people were able to exchange. Like one of the things that happened, it was all virtual meetings. And one of the things that happened in the beginning was there was a food bank downtown, and they had a bunch of rice and beans, and their clientele downtown didn't really use rice and beans. They didn't eat rice and beans. It wasn't culturally appropriate food. So this is what we talk about, culturally appropriate food. But there were other areas where people lived that was their staple, rice and beans. And so we were able to get that. It was like hundreds of pounds of food in these 1 pound packages of rice and beans. And we were able to get them out of that storage in downtown and distribute them to people who actually needed food. So that's the kind of thing that the Food Access Network was meant to accomplish. And it's still active today. It's not super active, but I emailed them the other day, and hopefully we'll be having a get-together sometime this summer. I also participated in the Pittsburgh Food Equity Ambassadors program along with the Food Policy Council. We planned and organized ambassadors. We ended up selecting ambassadors from every council district and having them come up with a list of priorities. Finally, the first list of priorities that was presented to the mayor, it was community-driven solutions. That's what we were looking for, and that's what we were looking for 8 years. And finally, in 2021, those recommendations were made. But like I said, Mayor Peduto got unelected in 2021, and so that was the last year that he was in office. So 2022 brought in a new mayor, and I was excited because it was a person who I thought was a friend of mine, Ed Gainey. We had worked together in politics and seen each other around and been friendly. I actually met with him a couple times while I was the food planner and talked to him about some of my ideas. And I was going to have him on my podcast. That never happened because he just got too busy being mayor. So when he got elected, I waited until after the November election because I was already working for the city. I asked if we could meet. We were going to meet at a coffee shop. It was on a Saturday morning, and I was like, that's not a great idea. He's going to be interrupted constantly. So I texted and asked if we could just meet at my house. So Ed and Jake Wheatley, who was to be his chief of staff, came over for brunch on a Saturday in November in 2021. And Ed said, I hear great things from the community about your work. However we could support you, let us know. And he said, what do you need? And I said, well, that's great. I need staff. He said, how many? I said 3. And he said, well, what would they do? And I was like, we need someone to focus on urban agriculture and food production. We need someone to focus on coordinating with the emergency food providers and encouraging people to sign up for SNAP. Because that's another thing I did is a SNAP outreach program together with the food bank, which was really awesome. Oh, and they would also work with expanding the Food Access Network. That was a good one. And then someone who would focus on food systems planning with the goal of helping to advance community food systems. Of course, I would manage it. I had a complete write-up of this plan, and a couple of my amazing interns were so valuable in doing this. And actually, I had a couple fellows. I guess that's what it was. Anyway, that's another reason why interns were so valuable to me. When I first started, I took on folks who were just looking for an internship because it was required. And then I wrote a description about a food intern, and I don't know what I called it, food policy intern, I guess is what it was. And I had amazing people seek me out. Word got around, I guess, in certain circles about what I was doing in Pittsburgh. And I had interns from like Yale and Syracuse and many from CMU and some from Chatham, from like all over the place. I had people writing grants so that they could pay for an internship to come to Pittsburgh to work with me for the summer. It was really cool. And I really, really appreciated the work that they did. So anyway, I sent Ed and Jake the proposal, and then I shared it with our director when she started. Well, actually, I did share it with my supervisor, who was the director until Mayor Gainey appointed Karen Abrams. And he was kind of mad that I hadn't come to him first. And he was like all hurt. It was really weird. And at first I was like, oh, I'm kind of sorry. And then I was like, wait, no. For 8 years, the entire time I've worked for city planning at that point, I had been proposing various versions of this and never got anywhere. He never asked me what I needed, never asked what kind of support I needed. And, Mayor Gainey asked me what I needed. And so I told him. So, yeah, I wasn't sorry. So the new director came in, and for a while it seemed to be going well. And then it got a little, I don't know, it was a little awkward. We were still working from home, not in the office. And I went to the office one day, and I was talking with the director, and I was frustrated because things weren't progressing, and it didn't seem like there was any value being put on the work that I was doing. And the director said to me, I think you think food is too important. And I just looked at her, and I was like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do with that information. I mean, I was the food planner. Of course, I think food is the most important thing. And it is. And it was just a really weird thing to say. So I met with the mayor again, and I said, look, I don't think Karen is interested in any of this food policy stuff. So maybe this work should be out of a different department, maybe out of the mayor's office. And, we talked, and he was just like, well, let me see what I could do. And then nothing ever really came of that, except that a couple months later, I was called into the director's office for a meeting with her and my supervisor. And they told me about a couple of complaints that colleagues had about things that I had said to them. One colleague who was a senior planner, and I was just a planner. So there was a senior planner position open, and I was going to ask for it. And so I said to him, are you a senior planner? And he said, well, yeah, I am. I was like, okay, good, because I didn't want to be in competition. And then I said, did you start as a senior planner? And he said, no, I started as a planner too. And I said, oh, and you got a promotion? You've only been here 2 years. I was like, I've been here 8 years, and I've been trying to get a promotion, and I haven't been able to. And he took offense to that and thought that I was saying that he didn't deserve his promotion, which was clearly not what I was saying. And he said that I made him feel bad about getting a promotion. So that was one of the complaints. And at the same time, the Food Policy Council was working with the mayor's office on creating a food justice fund. And the thing that we had the ARPA funds, the American Recovery Plan from pandemic. We had some money from that, trying to figure out what to do with it. And I had ideas. I mean, I had this whole division of food initiatives that I set up, and I had, different benchmarks and actual things that we could accomplish within that. And that wasn't getting attention, but giving that money to the Food Policy Council to distribute as grants was being entertained. And I just thought that was so weird. So I came up with a counter proposal, because the Food Policy Council, like I said, in their food action plan and through the ambassadors program, they had made recommendations for the city. And I said, why don't we use that money to fund the recommendations that they made for us? And it just never got any traction. And so eventually I just decided, well, this isn't gonna work. Nothing had happened from my meeting with the mayor, except I kind of got in trouble with some of my colleagues, and they had me going to coaching. And nobody ever said, so it was weird that I was going to coaching because I had said these things that upset my colleagues. So there was no mediation. There was no addressing any particular topic, except that Shelly needed professional coaching for, work, for my profession, whatever. In the future, they will say that I had made some sort of racial comments to my colleagues, and that I was being sent to professional coaching to deal with my racist ways. But race was never brought up. It just happened to be that 3 of my colleagues who were people of color were the ones that had complained about something that I said to them. So that was really weird. And I thought, oh, this feels weird. I'm not sure what's going on, but I wasn't I wasn't officially reprimanded. They made sure to tell me that it wasn't official. It wasn't anything that was going to go on my permanent record. So I was like, okay, this is just weird. So things were just weird in the office after that. I did actually start looking for another job because I was like, this is just not cool. I tried to wrap up my work and put things in order, but I was still working on the intern program. I was still doing the Adopt a Lot program. So that takes a lot of time. And I was getting a little depressed about the whole situation that I was in. It was very weird. And so I wasn't my normal enthusiastic self at work. I tried to be just, get my job done, keep my head down, and go about my business. Then in July 2023, I went away for the week of July 4th because my folks always get a cabin up in Cook Forest. My sister was coming in with her husband and 3 kids. And so I was getting ready to leave. And the Friday before, around 3:30 p.m., I get an email saying that a complaint had been filed against me. An allegation of harassment/hostile work environment was made against me, and they were investigating it and wanted to talk with me. I replied immediately and said that she could call me around 4:30, but she never did. And then I thought, oh, maybe I should contact my union steward. So I contacted Rita, and she told me to go enjoy the week. Don't worry about anything until I get back, and we'd set up a meeting. So I went to Cook Forest, had fun with my family, and that was a great week. And then on Friday, while I'm away, actually, I'm still up at Cook Forest, I get a text from my supervisor, and he asked me to call him. And when I reached him, he said that they didn't want me to go on this urban ag tour on Monday. The Secretary of Agriculture was coming for Urban Ag Week, and they didn't want me to go because I was being accused of, quote, talking negatively about the department to community leaders. And I was like, what are you talking about? And then I was like, he's like, well, that email that you got on Friday and blah, blah. And I was like, okay, fine. We'll sort this out. I didn't think it was a big deal. I thought maybe it was a misunderstanding. Anyway, I enjoyed the rest of my vacation. And when I got back on Monday, July 10th, Rita, my union steward, and I had a meeting with HR. They told me what I was accused of, but no details about who or what, except the 3 things that I was accused of saying. One was I said Karen was looking out for her homegirls. The other one was I said immigrants are good at weeding. And the third one was that Black people throw up their hands and quit. Except for the homegirls comment, which is so out of character for me, and I don't remember saying anything like that. I was able to explain these things because they were just taken out of context. I remembered saying them, and I remembered who all was there. We were in the car. So the whole idea of community leaders, there were no community leaders in the car when I had said these things. So that was weird. But the thing that was misinterpreted as immigrants are good at weeding was that we were talking about the Bugs Garden and all the weeds that they have there. They've been struggling with knotweed for many, many years, which is a huge invasive plant that takes over a lot of our vacant land. I said the Smalley Bantu farmers are really excellent at managing their weeds. We should have them come over here and help the Bugs Garden. They were both Adopt a Lot participants. And that was something that I had been working on, is getting the gardeners to collaborate with each other. And the thing about Black people throwing up their hands and quitting was, I had worked in the city, in communities for a long time. And a lot of the things, I tried really hard with the Adopt a Lot program, but I could not make everything easy for working with the government. There were just certain things that I couldn't do anything about. And so there is systemic racism in government, in the city. And, I said, I see all the time Black people just throwing up their hands and quitting, like people who had started an application with me and realized that there's just too many barriers and they couldn't go forward. So they would just quit the process. Not that they give up on life or anything. That wasn't. And she knew what I meant. This person knew what I meant. Anyway, she took that and ran with it. And so apparently those are the things that people had complained about. And that's what I was getting in trouble for. So I thought, okay, it's going to be some sort of warning or whatever. They had 7 witnesses, so I was able to give witnesses, but nobody else was there during that situation. So I asked if I could give character witnesses. And she said, sure, because I had to call everybody and make sure that they knew what was going on. And so on Tuesday, I had a list of 22 people that I sent them. We were in the office on Tuesdays and Wednesdays. So on Tuesday, I'm told that Karen wants to meet with me the next day. And it was about the complaint. And I said, well, the investigation isn't done yet, so that's weird. And he said, well, it will be tomorrow. And I thought, that's a really odd comment. So I thought that was weird, and I called Rita and told her what he had said, and she was like, well, I should be at that meeting, and they can't fire you, and they assured me, and I was like, it just sounds like they're gonna fire me, and she's like, no, they can't do that. So I go into work in the morning, and I tell Karen that I need to have my union rep there, and she said, your union rep doesn't need to be here. Not for this. And I was like, well, that's weird. And I was like, well, I won't be at this. She's like, you have to be at this meeting. You have to be there. She got real weird. And I was like, well, I won't be there unless Rita's there. And so she set up a link so that Rita could be there on the computer. So Stephanie, Joy, and I go to lunch. And while I'm at lunch, I check my email while we're, paying and getting ready to leave. And I get an email from HR saying that I was found guilty of this stuff that they accused me of. And I was just like, oh my God, this is weird. It's weird on the timing. It's weird on like so much weirdness. Anyway, and I was just like, they're going to fire me. They're going to fire me. This is so weird. So we come back from lunch and we ride up in the elevator with my supervisor and a lady that I'd never seen before. Turns out she is the city's lawyer. So I leave my purse at my desk and get my stuff together. All I took in was my phone and went into Karen's office, and they closed the door, and Rita was there virtually on the Teams call on Karen's computer. And Karen hands me a piece of paper. It's a letter, and I can't read it because I was really nervous. So I took a photo of it on my phone and sent it to Rita, hoping that she could figure out what was going on because I wasn't really sure. Rita's instructions to me were to just keep quiet and listen, but she said it's like being in surgery and I need to just let her do the work. So Rita got the letter and she was immediately at my defense. She realized that what the letter was, it was telling me that I was suspended for 5 days without pay pending termination. So at this point, it was really confusing. I had nothing on my record. I had never been in trouble. I was able to explain all of the things that they accused me of, and that they were taken out of context. And there was no conversation about anything. And they hadn't talked to any of my witnesses. And so the lawyer seemed really surprised that there were witnesses. And she asked Rita to tell her who those witnesses were. So most of the meeting was taken up with Rita reciting all 22 names and emails and phone numbers, and the lawyer writing them down and sort of asking Karen who that person is and whatever. So then Rita was saying, you can't suspend Shelly. This isn't how this works. She has rights. And the lawyer just kept saying, this is happening. And eventually the lawyer said to Karen, did you give her the letter? And she said, okay, great. Yeah, we're done. And Karen just closed the computer on Rita, just snapped it shut. And Karen said, I'm going to hear about that later. And I was just like, this is so weird. It was surreal. So they told me to turn in my phone and my computer and my key card. So I got up and I walked out. And honestly, I think it was really remarkable. I didn't react at all. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I didn't say anything. Did I have a poker face? I have no idea. But I just got up and I went to my desk. I tried to log onto my email one last time, but my account was already closed. They had already scheduled that to happen while we were having our meeting. So I looked up and my supervisor was just standing outside his office. He was, maybe like 10 feet away from me. But he was just looking at me. I guess he was escorting me out. So I got my shit together and I went over to my friend's desk and whispered to her, they just fucking fired me, meet me in the park. And then I went and loaded up my bike and left the building. I went across the street and I called Rita to be like, what just happened? And then I texted a bunch of people, including the mayor, saying Karen just fucking fired me, and then just sat shocked in the park with my friend until I was able to ride my bike home. So I had 5 days to write a letter to convince Karen not to fire me, but obviously that was not effective. So the whole grievance process started with my union. I'm so glad I was in a union. They really came through for me, and I'm really grateful for that. They fought very hard. So my union immediately filed a grievance, and then we waited, they've got 10 business days to reply. So back and forth. So then the next step was a meeting with my supervisor. And so then that was rejected. And then we had a meeting with Karen, which was very odd. And she actually read parts of the complaint, which I hadn't had access to. And so she was telling me things that I didn't know and like quoting people. And I was just like, what is this? And, I've seen it subsequently, and it's kind of bonkers. It was, people had something against me, and they wanted to get rid of me for whatever reason, and they denied my unemployment, so I wasn't getting any pay, and I was just cut off all of a sudden. I had no computer. Anyway, there's the first letter, then there's the grievance 1, grievance 2, grievance 3, which was with the director and the lawyer and the head of HR. And at that meeting, the lawyer for the city kept rolling her eyes and huffing. It was very weird. She essentially was calling us liars when Rita said, Shelly got fired. And she was like, she didn't get fired. And Rita was like, what are you talking about? And she's like, well, she got suspended for 5 days, and she could have written a letter. And if it was persuasive enough, she could have gotten her job back. And Rita said, well, she did write a letter. And she goes, well, obviously it wasn't persuasive enough. And so it was just really weird. And she was acting very oddly. And then she said something about, Rita was like, can you please stop making comments over my opening? It was an opening statement. And the lawyer goes, well, if you quit lying. And so my union rep was like, let's go. This isn't going to be productive. This is going to be a shit show. So we left. And that was actually a rescheduled one. We ended up showing up for that twice because the first time Karen was sick and didn't tell anybody or whatever, she couldn't make it. So we had to reschedule it. Then we went into arbitration. And in the meantime, I went and fought for my unemployment. And this was December 6th. And it only took the unemployment office a day to find in my favor because the city didn't show up. So I ended up getting my back unemployment, which was good. Arbitration was scheduled for January 29th. And it ended up being 2 days, which was so terrible because I'm sitting there listening to like 11 hours of people talking about what a piece of shit I am. It was brutal. And actually the very last witness was a colleague I'd worked with for 8 years, maybe 9 years. And she said, well, honestly, I don't have a problem with Shelly. I've never had a problem with Shelly. And after the day that I had, I burst into tears because someone said a vaguely nice thing about me. It was really brutal. And there was one funny thing that happened during this. So one of the things I was accused of was picking on my colleague and embarrassing her in front of the whole office. And passively aggressively putting a Post-it note on a document that was 300 pages long that she just left on the printer. I didn't know it was hers. I didn't know whose it was. I found this document on the printer. I walked around asking people whose it was. I stapled it. I put it on my desk and said, here's your document, whatever. And figured somebody would see it and pick it up. And a couple weeks later, it was still sitting there. And like I said, we're only in the office a couple days a week at this point. And so, after the first week, I put a Post-it note on it that said, save the trees. Because I'm like, who prints out a 300-page document and doesn't pick it up or doesn't wonder what happened to it? So anyway, when that person testified, she said that I knew it was hers and I waited for a day when she was in the office and then I embarrassed her and called her out in front of the whole office. And she also said that the Post-it note was passive aggressive and she was offended by it. And then her supervisor, who also testified against me, doubled down on passive aggressive and just said that I was a piece of work and I was, passive aggressive and I just thought I was hot shit. And it was very terrible. So this whole thing about the save the trees thing got a lot of attention and it was brought up at both days of arbitration. So the first day was in January. The second day was towards the end of February. And so it was a long pause in between. And, the second day was again 7 or 8 hours. And the first several hours were people testifying against me. Maybe it was just one person testifying against me. And then I got up after lunch and had several hours. I can't even remember how long it was of being cross-examined and telling my side of the story. And the really great part about that was that the director of HR was there. Finally, she could see and hear my side of the story, because she didn't get to, because the way that we were intimidated at the third grievance meeting and we had to leave. So all the stuff that she had been hearing for the past 7 months about me and about the case and about the details of this case, they were just false. So at the end of the second day of arbitration, when it's all done, everybody's testified, and the arbitrator is going over the next steps. And he's like, you send me the final briefs. You have 30 days. And then I'll take 30 days to review them. And then I'll make a decision. So I'll send you the transcripts, because they had a transcriber there for the whole 2 days of arbitration, and hundreds of pages of transcription. And so he's like, I'll send you the transcripts electronically in a couple formats. And if you want me to mail a hard copy, just let me know. Nope, I won't do that. Save the trees. And he just like caught himself mid-sentence. It was like, nope, not gonna do that. So it was really funny. And I was just like, oh my God. 5 weeks after that, I signed a settlement with the city. And I'm assuming that they realized that what happened was wrong. And so they offered a settlement to outline it. I can't sue them for any of this. I officially resigned on July 19th, 2023. They're going to give me a neutral reference. They gave me back pay and a year's salary. I'm eligible for rehire at the city, but I'm not promised a job. That was part of that. So my settlement came in 2 parts. The first one I picked up pretty quickly after the settlement was signed, and we were able to go to Youngstown for the eclipse, which was really nice. Then it took until July 12th for me to get the rest of my settlement. So the check was written prior to that, but I actually deposited it on July 12th. Not intentionally, but I had just picked it up and was able to deposit it that day. So that's it. That's how it ended. That's a decade. This last year was the worst, but that was a whole decade. And I think I might be done with food policy. I put my heart and soul into that job, and I was so hopeful that Pittsburgh had what it takes to be at the forefront of ending food insecurity. I really did. But instead, I was treated like shit and thrown away like trash. Funny thing, the director announced her resignation on the day that the city made me a settlement offer, which is a coincidence? It was a really hard time to go through, but I ended up being justified, but also still out of a job. So I don't know where I'm going. I mean, I have money, so I don't need to worry about panicking and getting a job immediately. I have some money to live off of, but I still am at a point where I'm trying to figure out what to do next, what to do now, as if the last 10 years never happened and I'm back to square one. But I do have a lot of experience now. I have a lot of things that I know how to do that I didn't know how to do before, so that's cool. And I've got this podcast, which I'm really pleased with. I'm disappointed and frustrated in the lack of action around solving things. It seems like everybody wants to just watch it go around and around. And there are things we can do. There's things that have been proven to be effective, but we're not doing it. We're not looking at it. People want to plan and think and talk about it, but I don't think anybody really wants to solve it. So that's not a place that I want to be. So where to next? I don't know. But I'm going to do more interviews, and I'm going to start talking more about myself, and including my husband, Brett, and just having a good time. One of the key things about me is that my identity isn't tied up with my job or a career. Sure, I'm passionate, and whatever I do, I'm in it 100%. But there's so much more to me. And Brett and I have a really good life. We live very simply. We don't need a lot besides food, of course. And good food. Although I am in the market for a car right now, which is really freaking me out. I haven't had a car payment in 20 years. Cars are expensive. Jeez. I'm glad I had the opportunities I've had in life. I feel very fortunate to have done so many things that I'm really happy about and still excited about. And I'm sure that new things are right around the corner. So if you hear of anything, feel free to let me know. If you have any ideas for projects, please reach out. And let me know also if there's anybody that I haven't interviewed on my podcast yet that you'd like to hear from. I'm really open to suggestions and looking forward to the future. Thanks for listening. Hope you've enjoyed my story.
Everyone knows that food is food. No secret. Eat that food with a bowl and spoon. Take that spoon. Everyone knows that food is cool. No secret. Eat that food
With Bowl and Spoon is written, produced and hosted by Shelly Dankler. Original theme song was written and performed by Paul LeBreeze and Friends. You can listen to With Bowl and Spoon wherever you get your podcasts. Don't forget to subscribe, like, review and share. Follow us and send us questions or messages on Facebook and Instagram at With Bowl and Spoon. Thanks for listening.
bowl and spoon. Bowl and spoon.